What is a religionless Christianity? What would that look like at our current historical moment?
Doing theology is just being here and present and building communities in the material world. Hey, welcome to another episode of Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who study philosophy, politics, and religion around the world, and we decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I'm Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori.
And we're going to get into it. Let's go!
All right, so for our first segment, we have the Shitty Minutes, and this is the segment where one of us rants on whatever it is that's grinding our gears this week. Austin, you've got the torch, so what's up?
All right, brother, I'm going super niche this week. Like, super niche. Are you ready? Well, I don't know how niche it is, actually, because the show's kind of been trending. And you did a show last week, but I'm going to do a show this week. So I'm going to do a little shitty minute about Gilmore Girls. Do you watch Gilmore Girls, Troy?
What do you think?
I think by the look on your face, that's no, you do not watch Gilmore Girls. Have you ever watched an episode of Gilmore Girls?
I have not.
Do you know what Gilmore Girls is?
Vaguely aware.
Are you aware that Gilmore Girls was off the air for about 8 or 9 years and it just came back and they released a new season?
Only retroactively since I heard that it came back.
Okay, so it has come back, and basically this is the sort of production story. The creators of the show, well, the creator of the show is a woman named Amy Sherman Palladino, and her husband are the executive producers. Well, Amy Palladino is, well, we'll just call her Sherman Palladino. She left the show at the end of the 6th season, and so other writers wrote the 7th season. And what that meant was that she wasn't able to actually finish the story that she ultimately envisioned from the outset. So they decided a few years later, now, this year, 2016, to release 4 new episodes that are basically fulfilling the ending that she always envisioned, right? So that's basically what happened. So the new season that came out is 4 episodes. They're each a feature length. They're about an hour and a half each. And each one takes place during a season. So it starts off with winter, and then it goes spring, and then it goes summer, and then the last one is fall. And then it ends the way that it would have ended like 10 years ago or whatever it was. But now, obviously, the characters are advanced 10 years. So, but anyway, basically, spoiler alert, if you are a huge Gilmore Girls fan and you don't want to know what happens at the end of this, pause now and fast forward about 10 minutes into the episode because I'm going to say something about the spoiler. Okay?
10 minutes?
Some spoilers. Okay, 4 minutes. Go 4 minutes into the future. Fuck this. We don't want to spend too much time on Gilmore Girls.
That's reasonable.
Here we go. So basically, the end of Gilmore Girls ends up with... Well, for those of you that know Gilmore Girls, I'm just going to give Troy a little bit of like a sort of cursory thing. Basically, it's a story about a mother and a daughter who are extremely close. The mother was 16 years old when she had the daughter. She and the daughter are best friends, more friend relation than mother relation, but sometimes some interesting tensions come out when there is the sort of mother-daughter relationship that emerges rather than the friend relationship. But basically, they're best friends. The mother's parents are extremely wealthy, and because she got knocked up when she was 16, she kind of was a disgrace, and so she kind of moved out of the house. Plus, she never really enjoyed the wealth and all the shit that came with all of her parents' bourgeois sort of respectability and shit like that. She hated that culture and that world and the private schools and yada, yada, yada. So she's kind of an outcast, right? And she always wanted to make it on her own. So she's completely independent. So the idea is now that she has her daughter, she wants her daughter to, go to Harvard and do all of these amazing things, even though she ends up going to Yale. But she wanted her to go and do all of the things that she didn't get to do. And she wants her to be independent and not living under the shadow of her parents and her parents' wealth in that world that she didn't want Rory, the daughter, to be exposed to. Anyway, bottom line is this what happens. The very end of the episode, at the very last episode of the new season, Rory turns to her mom and says, "Mom, I'm pregnant." She's not married. She's pregnant, probably from this guy named Logan, who's this guy that, he's kind of flaky. He's not really good to her, but he's charming and he's nice and he comes from a lot of money, but he's also engaged to this other chick. So anyway, the daughter gets knocked up. So the idea is that things kind of come full circle. And in the very first episode ever, in the first season, Rory and Lorelai, the mom and daughter, have a sort of discussion where the daughter basically says, like, "You're basically me," or the daughter says, like, "I'm you," or something like that. And so it's this idea of the sort of cyclical return of things, right? Which I found to be kind of interesting because they live in this really small town, in this fictitious town called Stars Hollow. And it's this idea that everybody that was growing up that the story focuses on wanted bigger things. They wanted to get out of this town, right? Rory wanted to go to school and she wanted to be a journalist like Christiane Amanpour, and she wanted to go and do like these crazy foreign, interests pieces and all this other stuff like that. And, her best friend Lane was from a really repressive Christian family and Seventh-day Adventist family. And she wanted to get out and be in a rock band and, be famous and, kind of buck the trends of this small town and get away. Well, it doesn't end up happening at the end. Fast forward 10 years, Lane has 2 kids, and she's still in the band, but they're still living in Stars Hollow, trying to make the best of what they had, but it was kind of a compromised life. Rory, she doesn't exactly go on and, do the Christiane Amanpour thing. She has published a couple things in like The Nation and a couple of other fucking, little one-off pieces, but she'd never really done anything huge. She wasn't living this like thrilling life. So here's my shitty minute. Now that I'm 5 minutes in, here we go. The shitty minute is I read a couple of articles about a bunch of people bitching and complaining that all this season finale did was kind of like take women's progress and stifle it because women, the women in the show had all these grand ideas, but they never get out of the story. So it's just this really cynical take on women's capacities and women's flourishing. And here's my point, my shitty minute point, Troy. And I want to see what you think about this, even though you don't know the show. Actually, I kind of thought it was a really interesting story because rather than being so concerned with the competitive, ambitious nature of a typical like market-driven capitalist environment, it's almost like what ends up happening is this small town is kind of viewed as a solemn escape, as a comfortable place, as a place where, yeah, things do eternally recur, but it's not the eternal recurrence of the same in sort of a stifling sense, but it's kind of the eternal recurrence of difference. Because even though Rory didn't get pregnant when she was 16 and then have to escape the shadow of her parents that she kind of had problems with, she kind of still is pregnant out of wedlock, but that's okay. She doesn't need to have those big, huge ambitions. And I feel like the show's being unnecessarily or unfairly criticized for not going big enough with the scope and doing the typical thing, which is she's chasing her dreams, and the happy ending is that she gets her dreams and she takes over the world and she becomes an empowered woman and she's liberated, which I feel like is the cliche way to do it. And the thing that I thought was interesting about the way this show did it is it was kind of like, no, it's okay. Shit happens in circles sometimes. And it kind of reminded me of Deleuze and the idea of the eternal return of difference. So that was my shitty minute. I'm kind of okay with the ending, even though everybody seems to be really mad with the ending. I'm kind of cool with it. Eternal recurrence of difference. It's okay to be stuck in a small town and have a baby and not be married and shit like that and work for the local paper. Fuck it. Sometimes that's cool. Fuck ambition sometimes, even though I'm very ambitious. But fuck ambition sometimes. That's okay.
So your shitty minute's more about the reaction to the ending of Gilmore Girls than the actual ending itself. I'm gathering,
exactly.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Are you sure that the ending wasn't actually about like the eternal recurrence of hopelessness and despair, and that no matter what you do, you'll just repeat the past, and you should give up on your dreams?
It could be that too, which I think is a really interesting point. So I'm okay with that too. I'm actually okay with both. What I'm not okay with, in this moment at least, maybe tomorrow I'll be in a different mindset because I can totally see where they're coming from, and I actually agree with them in part. But part of me also is in agreement with what I just said for the past 5 minutes. So I'm kind of torn here. But yes and no and sort of and maybe, and I'm being conflicted because I'm conflicted soul, Troy.
I kind of like the idea that this was on CW, right? Or something like that? Gilmore Girls?
Originally, yeah.
It's got that CW vibe though, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's very safe.
So I kind of like the idea that you would do 7 or whatever years of a show that's about teenage girl problems. Would I be correct in summarizing it somewhat as that?
There is a lot of that.
Amongst other things. And then ending it with just like this like hopeless and dark, fatalistic, coda. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Basically,
and that's what
fuck
they did.
all your dreams.
That's exactly what they did. Yeah. And it is. It's kind of like, well, but the reason I say it's not the eternal return of the same is because there are differences. There are variations, right? And so nothing is ever the same in the Deleuzian sense. So there's always sort of like new flows or new variations of intensity. And so Rory is older because she's 32 now rather than being 16, whereas her mom was 16. So it's not the absolute repetition of the same, but it is a repetition of sorts. But there are sort of micro variations, and those micro variations, I think, make it interesting.
This is also how Star Wars should end.
How?
Like, they should bring Luke Skywalker back into the fold. and then he kind of like helps their resistance, the rebellion, everything. And then at the end, just comes out in like turd cloaks and is like, "Yeah, I was fucking with y'all. I'm actually gonna follow my father. He was correct when he went down the Vader path. Fuck the rebellion." And then it's
that
just
would be
over.
so awesome.
And then just tyrannical darkness over the whole galaxy.
Dude, that'd be so awesome. I fucking love
badass.
it. Because don't you think, isn't it kind of just sappy and boring that we get the same sort of like triumphant narrative all the time where the person has the dreams and they overcome the small town and all of the restraints and limitations that are imposed upon them, and they go and they become the new Christian Amanpour and they, you know, deliver a Pulitzer Prize piece. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's cool. But that's kind of just like the same shit that you always see, especially on a sentimental bullshit network like CW. Even though this was a Netflix, the new season was Netflix, but same shit. Still in the lineage of CW.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I literally have no idea what you were talking about for 6 minutes, but I'm cool with the conclusion.
I will say this. After you finish Westworld, Gilmore Girls. That's my next assignment for you, Troy.
Yeah, good luck with that.
It's like 140 episodes. Yeah, an hour long each.
I can't imagine a time where I have so little to do that will end up being the case. It's just not going to happen.
All right, then, moving on. All right, cool. So now we're going to get into our main segment for the week. And this week, Troy is going to introduce it because I'm not really even sure how to introduce it. So, Troy, how are we going to introduce the topic for this week?
Okay, so basically there was an article last week, I believe, in the Huffington Post, which is not exactly the source material that we usually go to for talking about stuff in the podcast. But there was an article titled, "Has the Bonhoeffer Moment Finally Arrived?" By Stephen R. Haynes, who teaches at Rhodes College. And he's a Bonhoeffer scholar. He talks about having gone to Bonhoeffer conferences. And questions whether or not, since this whole phenomenon with Trump being elected president of the United States, whether or not a form of resistance or a theologically founded form of resistance like that of Bonhoeffer against Hitler and the Nazis is warranted, or even if that analogy is warranted and what it can tell us. I thought there were some interesting comments in the article, and that it was also lacking a large bit of the source material that I think you and I would certainly find interesting, especially Bonhoeffer's later theological writings. So I thought maybe we could talk about it. Maybe talk a little bit about why Bonhoeffer might be important to us, both as a historical and a intellectual figure, and whether or not we think there is some sense in which we can learn something from Bonhoeffer and apply it to our own predicament.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Now, did you read Rhodes' article that he wrote in 2015 that was called "The Bonhoeffer Moment is Here, Now What?"
I had no idea that existed. I guess this is what that was based on.
Yeah, it was. So it's shorter. It's much shorter, and it's more just a quick little pithy comment on Rick Scarborough, who was I don't know if he still is, but was Ronnie Floyd, who was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention in 2015, who warned the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, that this is a Bonhoeffer moment for every pastor in the United States, referring to the potential national legalization or lifting of restrictions, I guess we should say, of gay marriage. And so that was the context in which Rhodes' first article was written. He was basically saying, okay, so what does this mean exactly? And is this an appropriate designation? So this is kind of a follow-up, basically saying, so if that was a Bonhoeffer moment, maybe this is more of an appropriate time, historical moment to use the designation. But of course, he wants to do so hesitantly.
Yeah, so I guess we should first talk about, just for those who may be unfamiliar, who Bonhoeffer is and what the historical context that we're referring to, that context is. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German Lutheran theologian in the early 20th century. And he, as well as being a pastor at times and a theologian, when the Nazis came to power in 1933, was one of the first kind of towering intellectual figures to step up and pronounce himself vehemently in hostility towards the Nazi Party and their rhetoric against the Jews. He wrote an essay called "The Church and the Jewish Question," which basically derided the Nazis and especially the German state Lutheran Church for not immediately standing up against the Nazis and their persecution of the Jews, or the rhetoric against the Jews, even before you had actual action taking place, as far as internment and concentration camps and whatnot. So Bonhoeffer is seen today as being, having a very prescient moment there, and that he basically saw what the rest of the Jewish Christian church and Jewish Christian community seems to at least not see at all, or maybe see too late. And so he's in a sense celebrated by almost every kind of Christian community today. Liberal Christians love him because he was a liberal theologian, although that's debated by some currently. That's not really a debatable topic. And obviously standing up against tyranny and oppression. And conservative Christians tend to love him too for being involved in an assassination plot against Hitler, for which he was then imprisoned and executed eventually. It seems to me conservative Christians don't really read Bonhoeffer, because if you did, they probably wouldn't like him. But
no, not at all.
Yeah, they take they take that action as being sort of a putting your money where your mouth is kind of thing. And since for conservative Christians, liberal Christianity is usually seen as being wishy-washy and not ever willing to actually act on any of its principles, basically like a hypocritical kind of belief or a fake kind of belief, this is sort of proof that Bonhoeffer wasn't really a liberal because he cared about his work, which is, I think, a ridiculous polarization. But that said, he is definitely celebrated by all spheres in a way that really probably nobody else is in the modern theological history, right?
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's almost like, I feel like Augustine, whereas Reformed people love Augustine and Catholics love Augustine for very different reasons. And, there's a little bit of hesitation within Reformed circles about how Augustine may be venerated by the Catholic Church. But I feel like there is a similar crossover, not obviously between conservative and liberal in the same way, but there's a sort of analogous crossover appeal. And it's interesting because when you actually read Augustine, I almost wonder how Protestants, I'm like, do you understand like what this guy was talking about sometimes? But it almost seems like he has a similar sort of crossover appeal that everyone is kind of like, they try to claim him,
That's why I said modern, because Augustine is exactly who I was thinking of.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And that isn't Augustine in a similar place contextually? I mean, he's celebrated by Reformed Christians because of the sort of, it seems like they like read some Calvinism back into Augustine, which seems ridiculous because it's not there, only if taken completely out of context. And theologically, he'd be an utter heretic for conservative Christians today. But he stood up against Rome in certain ways, writing the City of God. So there's kind of a political avenue there where clearly he was putting himself out, and the Confessions is what people tend to read, and they see this biographical narrative about the drama of his soul with God and forgiveness and repentance and all these things. And so you can read it without having the liberal, or not liberal, but the early Christian church theological underpinnings that mess with conservative Christians today.
Particularly the Platonic and Neoplatonic metaphysical things that contemporary Christians would completely reject.
Would they, though? Or do they just do it in a different way?
You think?
That's a different thing. We can talk about that in a different time.
Okay. Well, yeah, perfect. So now let's talk about how you first found Bonhoeffer. I'm assuming did you get introduced to Bonhoeffer when you were an undergrad, or was it prior to that?
I was well prior to that.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, we read The Cost of Discipleship in a high school reading group. And so that was immediately introduced. And I think we just read parts of it, and I certainly didn't understand a lot of it because it was a little bit more above brow for what I was able to digest at the time. But just the notion in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, the basic idea was that Christianity in the early 20th century had gotten to a point where it was all about being comfortable. And that Jesus's, the gospel as Jesus presented it as the kingdom of God is seen as being this way to attain personal individual salvation that lets the guilt go away from your inner life. And Bonhoeffer thought that was incredibly parasitic upon Christianity and had, in a sense, destroyed Christianity. And so he wanted to reinforce this notion that discipleship means to take up your cross daily as Jesus puts it, and actually live a difficult, hard, uncomfortable life compared to not committing to faith.
And I think that's the stuff that fundamentalist and reformed and contemporary evangelicals can kind of get on board with, right? It's the idea that it's the narrow path as opposed to the wide path. You're supposed to be an outcast. You're supposed to be kind of constantly on the fringes as the persecuted. So I think they think that any time they're being persecuted, even if it's self-imposed because of they're being dicks or whatever their reasons are, even if it's a self-imposed persecution, they would then try to be like, but we're walking that narrow path. And so they sort of, I don't know, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. And that's why they kind of align themselves, I think, as you know, I was going to say bedfellows. I don't know if that's an appropriate metaphor, but as co-wanderers with Bonhoeffer.
That's exactly right? When Bonhoeffer's talking about the cost of discipleship, he's talking about standing up against the state and influential powers in society that persecute the least of these, and aligning yourself with those least, with the powerless people. The very argument in that essay we referenced earlier, The Church and the Jewish Question, was that even though Jews are not Christians, they are people of God, and Bonhoeffer was arguing the church has to see them exactly as it would see Christian brothers and align themselves with them against the states and the persecution of this. And that's exactly what the kingdom of God message would have been for Jesus if he was around at the time. So he's appropriating that gospel message for the current moment. Whereas, I mean, can you imagine fundamentalists and evangelical churches taking up to do this with the idea of a Muslim registry? I mean, it seems like evangelicalism is very much in favor of comfortability and safety and gaining their cultural power back. And that seems like completely anathema to what Bonhoeffer was arguing. That was the very problem. Yeah.
If I can read just a quick little quote of his, and this is from the first Rhodes article, The Bonhoeffer Moment is Here Now What? He quotes Bonhoeffer and says, "The church has an unconditional obligation toward the victims of any ordering of society, even if they do not belong to the Christian community." And what Bonhoeffer doesn't say is that unconditional obligation is to convert their individual souls so that they embrace Jesus and reject their pagan ways. That's not what Bonhoeffer says, right? That's not at all what he's saying. He's saying you meet them where they are, regardless if they are a part of the Christian community. And you stand in solidarity with the marginalized and vulnerable persons that are being persecuted by the state or by the large system or whatever. So that is where it completely diverges from the idea of the evangelicals' emphasis on the obligation towards saving souls.
Yeah, Bonhoeffer made was completely clear about the fact that the enemy in theology was individualism.
Right.
He even called it the essence of religion is an individualism, the drama of the soul with its God as an individual agent seeking to remedy its guilt. That's the point of religion, and that's anathema to Christianity. Christianity, he was arguing, is completely against that very idea. And so, when he's talking about this unconditional obligation, it's funny, I wrote down that same quote to talk about, he's talking about justice as the goal, a social, communal form of justice, not at all some individual sense of achieving salvation or even of like safety and comfortability in the state.
Right. I mean, it's almost, he's not a liberation theologian in the formal sense, coming out of like the Latin American liberation theology or Black liberation theology or Asian liberation theology or anything like that. But he is kind of a precursor to the movement of liberation theology and kind of fits within a sort of almost a social gospel. I mean, would you call it, could it kind of fit in like that Walter Rauschenbusch sort of world?
I don't know about stemming from that, but there's certainly some points of contact with that.
Yeah, and because they kind of emerged around the same time, but like you say, not causally related, right? Or Rauschenbusch was maybe before him, right? Because Rauschenbusch was earlier, 1900s, wasn't he? But it's interesting that they were responding to the same historical moment, the radical individualization of modernism. And so the way that they kind of emerged from that was then responding to how the Christian church was responding to the what they saw as being like the secular modernism of the world. So it was like modernism, then Christianity responds towards like fundamentalism and radical individual salvation. And then you have these guys like the social gospel movement, Bonhoeffer, and then later liberation theology that's kind of also responding within their historical contexts to a similar impetus.
Yeah, it's important to see, if you want to get down to the scholarly foundations of this, that Bonhoeffer, being a liberal theologian, a German liberal theologian, is responding to the two big German theologians of his time. It's Rudolf Bultmann and Karl Barth. And so he criticizes both of them, Bultmann a little more than Barth, but he sees them as both problematic for theological, reasons that then flesh themselves out in practical manifestations of the church that he thinks are problematic, and that the conservative or the kind of everyday German Lutheran experience in many ways manifested those inherent problems in theological understanding.
Cool. Now, so let's shift tack towards the contemporary historical moment. So Rhodes's article says, has the Bonhoeffer moment finally arrived? And so obviously in the first article where he talks about the Bonhoeffer moment, and he has that in scare quotes, right? Because he's quoting these kind of conservative Southern California or Southern Baptist pastors who were saying that was the Bonhoeffer moment, that, the government is going to impose gay marriage upon us. To truly be a Bonhoefferian or be in that legacy, you have to stand against that, because that's what the cost of discipleship is. And basically Rhodes says, no, that's a total misappropriation of Bonhoeffer and what he was doing. But then he talks about now this moment, and he says Trump being elected, the rise of European nationalism and similar, identarian politics that have been pressed to the fore. Is this now the Bonhoeffer moment? Is this finally kind of some sort of consonant or maybe even analogous historical moment?
Yeah, and the first thing he points out, he says, no, it's not. Trump is not Hitler. We shouldn't equate the two. That's more obscurantist than helpful.
Right.
But then he says there's points of similarity, of an analogy that are a little too obvious to just ignore. And he points out especially the Christian churches, both the state churches in Europe as well as all the non-denominational churches and mainline churches in America, have seemed very, very willing to be co-opted by these nationalist movements in a way that the German Lutheran Church did with the Nazis, and that Bonhoeffer is so celebrated for having recognized the seeds of that when it was just beginning, that there was no immediate resistance or even like a disgust reaction that would show you that the Christian church was being faithful to its mission. I think he's absolutely right about that. We've talked about that in this podcast, right? That there's just it's really strange to us that Christians who celebrate equality and the actual gospel principles of the New Testament, and then see no problem with things like a Muslim registry or massive deportation of immigrants, or just the suffering on a wild scale of basically powerless people and minorities in their own country for the sake of basically making America sort of align itself with their own vision of the past.
So here's the weird thing, though. Okay. So I'm going to generalize a little bit, but these terms that I'm going to use are just placeholders to kind of open up broader notions, right? So the Evangelical Church believes that there already was a Bonhoeffer moment, and the Bonhoeffer moment was the success or the reign, if you will, of like Obama, Obamacare and supposedly nationalized healthcare in their mind, and the great fear of big government and the legalization of gay marriage and abortion rights that are kind of in their mind rampant and all over, and the decline of cultural values, conservative cultural values. And so they thought that the Bonhoeffer moment had arrived, and so they would think that the election of Trump is a sort of culmination of that, right? That it's a sort of validation or an institutionalization of that Bonhoefferian resistance. Whereas this particular author of this article, Rhodes, and maybe a liberal theologian or a progressive theologian, or even those that would be just kind of in general operating under an antagonistic logic, some sort of leftist or resistant type of logic, they would say, no. That's not the Bonhoefferian moment. Now is the Bonhoefferian moment. Because now we actually have the stage that is set for a similar situation that Bonhoeffer himself responded to. So what's different? Why is one logical paradigm more accurate or more faithful to the sort of Bonhoefferian antagonism than the other?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about, I guess, this conservative Bonhoeffer moment or the interpretation of it for a second, although I don't think it's really the interesting issue. Are you familiar with that book? I think the guy's name is Eric Metaxas, the really popular Bonhoeffer book that came out a couple years ago.
I read about it, and then again, Rhodes talks about it. I remember when it came out, but I haven't been, as deep in the theology world for a few years now.
Yeah, I read some passages of it just to see what it was like, and it's atrocious. I mean, not only is the writing just terrible, but I mean, the level of scholarship, not that it's trying to be scholarly, but it's laughable. I mean, basically, he makes the point that it's inappropriate to call Bonhoeffer a liberal theologian. Even in his later days, when he, the Letters and Papers from Prison is a very celebrated collection of works from Bonhoeffer that he wrote while in prison later in his life, that most scholars seem to think is a bit of a turn in his thinking. Now, we can question whether or not it's a turn or actually a fully blooming set of concepts, but basically Metaxas says that's not correct because Bonhoeffer preached a lot before he died, and liberal theologians don't preach. They don't care about preaching. That was his evidence.
Oh, okay. He obviously never took any classes on formal logic.
Yeah, basically it's meant to appeal to as many non-scholarly laymen, white evangelicals as possible.
Right, okay.
So he sold a bunch of books, and I'm sure he's making a little bit of cash. So good on him for that, but he's an asshole. That said, the whole idea that there's a conservative Bonhoeffer moment is ridiculous. I mean, there's no sense in which there's Trump aligns with a positive Bonhoefferian vision for social gospel or the community of God. That's ridiculous. Now, is there a liberal Bonhoeffer moment, though? Mm-hmm. I mean, we can talk about this. I think that the idea that the Bonhoeffer moment is just the negative vision, just the how to oppose, basically fascism or the rise of fascism, really misses out on the positive vision of Bonhoeffer, which seems to me much more important. I mean, Bonhoeffer himself said near the end of his life, he kind of feels like it was a mistake to try to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah, well, because he was a lifelong pacifist, right? And so when he got to that breaking point, when the sort of threat of the impossible, because he actually thought that that Hitler was Antichrist. I don't know about the Antichrist, but Antichrist, And
symbolically,
symbolically, right. And so he figured this was something that had to be done. So with the threat of the impossible looming, he sort of compromised on his principles that were so near and dear to the way that he viewed things. And then he kind of, not he hated himself, but he had serious guilt about that in prison, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if we're going to talk about the positive vision of Bonhoeffer, it seems to me the concept to go with is this idea he wrote about when later in his life in the Letters and Papers from Prison of a religionless Christianity, or Christianity without religion, or after religion has died, which is a very vague and difficult concept to understand. A lot of people have gone back and forth trying to interpret it. One thing we can be definitely sure of is that it has nothing to do with conservative evangelicalism's idea of what the gospel is. Very clearly. I mean, Metaxas in his book basically says that religionless Christianity means taking your faith seriously and not being wishy-washy, which is I'm sure that a celebrated academic scholar had a moment of clarity where he realized we should be serious about Christianity while he was going to his death.
Right. And not only that, but he already wrote a whole fucking book about that in, 8 years prior to that or something like that was all about that.
Yeah, it's such an asinine, it's fodder for a 90-minute, one of those, what's that company that makes all the Christian movies, about the firefighter and stuff?
Oh God, the Kirk
and
Cameron
God's Not Dead and all those.
shit?
Yeah. It sounds like a Kirk Cameron setup for some stupid plot or whatever.
Right. Well, and the thing is that it seems to map on very conveniently to the idea of the contemporary American evangelical notion that Christianity is not a religion, but it's a relationship. And I think that they might try and that's exactly what they're trying to do, that it's not a religion, it's a relationship. It's this individual commitment, which is so strange because it takes so much from such celebrated Christian thinkers historically, like Bonhoeffer and Kierkegaard, and the idea of that existential commitment to your faith, but it bastardizes it so grossly that it actually misses out on truly what was challenging and what was the cost of discipleship within them, or what was it that would cause Kierkegaard to write a book like Fear and Trembling. What is it that actually makes the Christian faith truly difficult? And it has nothing to do with, it's just a relationship rather than a religion, you know? So yeah, it is definitely a kind of distortion of ideas.
Yeah, Bonhoeffer's entire point in the religionless Christianity is that religion is all about relationship, and that's stupid, or that that's parasitic upon Christianity. If all you care about is having a good relationship with God or whatever, then you're not going to give a shit about the fact that people are being killed by the state.
Right.
Because that has nothing to do with your own personal drama with God. His point was that that's the problem. Not that this, religion is some like set of practices that you do without any intentionality. And so instead you should care about a relationship with God, which means like basically praying a lot, I guess, and having the feels when you sing songs. Which, by the way, those are ritual practices you do without any intentionality also.
Yeah, exactly. And feeling guilty, right, when you do something that your pastor has told you you're not supposed to do.
Every time you jack off, an angel kills a kitten.
Funny note, did you know that the reason that Kellogg's was invented was because he thought, Mr. Kellogg, Dr. Kellogg, thought that it would stop young men from masturbating? So that's...
How?
That's what religion gets you. I don't know, because they'd eat more fucking cereal and it would occupy their time.
I feel like all the sugar would make you actually want to, do that more.
Well, it's just cornflakes back in his day, right? Just like basic Kellogg's cornflakes, not Frosted Flakes. Okay. I don't think they had Frosted Flakes in the first run. I think they were just boring fucking cornflakes. He's a boring fucking... I think he was like a Seventh-day Adventist or something, so really austere,
And now look at Kellogg's being boycotted by Christian America.
It's amazing. Eternal recurrence of difference.
So... to talk about this religionless Christianity idea, if it's not about this notion of a relationship, which is the modern evangelical notion, what is a religionless Christianity? I think we can kind of, without getting too deep into the scholarship aspect of it, basically say that Bonhoeffer was calling religion the very stuff that he was critiquing in the German church at the time, which means all the negative stuff that we've been talking about. The idea that Christianity is about an individual and not the community. Bonhoeffer wrote a book on ethics called Ethics, and the entire idea is to reinterpret the gospel message as a series of ethical challenges for community formation, and not about individual ethics or what you should or shouldn't do to be good or virtuous in the eyes of God. And so that's part of it, is this individualism. And then also, religion is also this notion of God as a providential figure who's going to make everything comfortable and all right. He even critiqued Barth for being kind of like this, having this providence as a main notion. Instead, we should celebrate a weak and suffering God, the very God that's found in Jesus, who dies at the hands of the powers of the state. And so these notions together, in some sense, form what he calls religion, and says that this is dying away. It has no relevance anymore. And if this is what Christianity is, then it will say nothing to the modern person. So it has to adapt and evolve to some new sense if it's going to be important for history.
Now, before Altizer, because when did Altizer start writing? Was that 50s or 60s?
Yeah, 50s and 60s.
Okay, so is Bonhoeffer kind of viewed as a death of God theologian before the sort of label actually became a little pithy designation?
That's the thing, is the death of God theologians celebrated Bonhoeffer because they saw some precursor there, which is probably true, right? But I mean, I don't think it would be accurate to say he would have been on the same side as Altizer in every way. There are definitely points of confluence there, though.
Okay, because the reason I ask is that it sounds like that there's this idea of of a sort of collapse of transcendence, or a move away from the sort of metaphysical dualism that you often find in hierarchical ontologies, or the kind of traditional ideas of, I mean, I don't want to say traditional, but especially in contemporary theology, the way that it's understood, that there is a dualistic split between the material world, the immaterial world. God is this radical other. God is this thing that you can only be reached through various rituals or activities that sort of like transcend upwards, if you will. Whereas Bonhoeffer says, no, it's not about that. Whether that's the state, or whether that's the institution of the church, or whether that's your own sort of personal piety, that's not what it's about. It's about the sort of immanentization. It's just about the immediacy of seeing God in the suffering of the other, which isn't his language, but it seems that kind of fits, yeah?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the notion for Bonhoeffer was basically, look, what Paul did, being the first Christian theologian, right, is he took the gospel story and said, why is this important? Why is the passion of Jesus important as a narrative? And he took that and said, well, that has to be, the equality of Jews and Gentiles together in the church for the sake of a universal community. Mm-hmm. He's basically saying, how do we do that again? Like, how do we take just the story itself, the narrative aspect, and say, how does that inspire and influence us now? What does that mean to us now? What would be taking that seriously? What would that look like at our current historical moment? Which is, for him, that meant opposing the Nazis and being in solidarity with all those that were being persecuted by the state. Which, to me, means that absolutely this is analogous to us, right? In some sense, can we see that same story, whether or not we're practicing Christians or hold any of the theological beliefs? Can we see that story as being inspiring to us? Not in the stupid sense of inspiring where you just get the feels, but a sense in which it drives you or creates an inner drive within you to make change. What do you think? Can we do that? Can we have that same moment? Is that our Bonhoeffer moment?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I know so many people, especially if you're listening, there are so many people who seem to be automatically, if you didn't come from a theological or a Christian background or an Islamic background or a Jewish background or something, that there's this secular disgust towards anything pertaining to Christianity. And first of all, I want to say that I think there's actually something really useful in looking at someone like Bonhoeffer, who, even though he's labeled a sort of Christian theologian and a great figure in Christian history, I think there is something really useful about the logical underpinning that impelled him in his antagonism to the state. So that would be the first thing I would say. I just think that we can find resources anywhere, So anywhere, I think there are useful resources. And second of all, I do think that this is kind of a Bonhoeffer moment. I love how Rhodes made it clear Trump is not Hitler. I'm kind of getting tired of the Hitler comparisons, even though I know that they're here to stay and they're probably only going to get worse for the next few years, but I'm kind of getting tired of them.
They obfuscate more than they help clarify things, for sure. Yeah,
exactly. And what it does is it just creates a sort of simple, like, schoolyard kind of argument. It's like this ad hominem name calling. And even if it isn't that, even if there is a sort of serious way in which you could say there is a sort of Hitlerian sense to Trump, I'm not sure that that's really useful in most settings. I mean, maybe when you and I are having pints or something like that alone, but I think in public discourse, it's just like you said, it's going to obfuscate things more. So I'm not really interested in that. But with that said, there does seem to be a sort of intelligibility or a logic that in the historical moment is pretty similar, that maps on very well analogously to the sort of historical moment that Bonhoeffer was responding to. And I do think that the Bonhoeffer moment has arrived. I mean, I haven't seen so many fucking articles or rallies or been involved in conversations with people who are whatever, leftist, I don't know what label you want to use, anarchist, Marxist, socialist, whatever ism and bullshit name you want to ascribe to yourself. I haven't seen so many things that have been so hopeful about the possibility of collective solidarity, like, ever in my life. Even when Obama was running on hope and change, it was very, it was very amorphous, whereas this seems to have a sort of possibility for an actual movement of a we that can emerge and that is emerging, that is forming out of the event or the apocalyptic event of the Trump phenomenon, which would then require a Bonhoeffer moment. That would be the group infusion in the Sartrean sense, right? Or the sort of event in the Baduian sense is that there would be something, the space that's being opened up.
Yeah, the problem with the Hope and Change movement in 08 is that because Obama becomes president, he has this huge mandate because of the popular vote is so overwhelming in his favor. You basically just sit back then and say, okay, Obama, do your thing. You got a supermajority in Congress. Go ahead. Make the hope and change, or fulfill the hope and make the change happen. So there's no mass movement there. It's just sitting back and waiting for that to happen. And then, of course, it for the most part fails. And now that we have the opposite happen, there is no like cultic leader you can follow and say he or she's gonna be the person who leads the mass movement, because there's literally nobody in power that's like that. So the only way to do it is to form a mass movement, or at least small movements in the interim.
Right.
And that's, in a sense, the one like silver lining of this whole thing, right? Is that nobody can say, hey, just sit back and wait for the goodness to happen because it's already on its way. You can't present that as a legitimate option. No one believes it.
Yeah, and I guess if we were going to be kind of consistent with the Bonhoeffer moment, to sit back is to be complacent. It reminds me of the Howard Zinn quote that is, you can't be neutral on a moving train. And it's the idea that the world is moving in a particular way. History is moving, culture is moving, politics is moving, things are moving. And we're already on the fucking train. We're thrown in it, in the Heideggerian or Sartrean sense. You're thrown into conditions that are not of your own choosing, as Marx says in the 18th Brumaire. And so the idea is you either got to fight against it or you're going with it. And that's why this complacency is actually a complicity with things that are going on. And so for the Bonhoeffer moment, you have to completely reject any sort of racial or gender or religious privilege that would isolate you, or that would pull you into that complicity, that would isolate you from the counter movement, and you need to completely throw yourself in. You said it a couple weeks ago. You need to be vigilant in that counter movement, in antagonism to the present. I keep using the word system. I feel like there should be a better word for that, but the present historical moment, if you will. Yeah,
Bonhoeffer made that exact point, right? That the real problem, or the major problem, wasn't that so many German Christians were Nazis, but that so many sat back and were like, hey, is this really going to affect us? Right. No. I mean, and you know what? The economy's getting better, and it's building on, roads and shit, so this is actually okay. We can kind of sit back and not worry about it so much. It doesn't affect us, so we can be complacent, and it's not a big deal. And that exact thing is going to happen to many white people, especially white men like us in America. We're not going to be affected as much by whatever's going to happen over the next 4 to 8 years. Does that mean we just sit back and complain about it from afar, or say, oh, that's so bad on Twitter, but then sit back in our comfortable lives and do nothing? Or does that mean we actually become in solidarity with those who are going to be suffering? Was it Haynes gave the example of, if there's a Muslim registry that's enacted, how many white Christians will go sign up, right, and say that they're Muslim? And now that's just a symbolic gesture. That doesn't necessarily actually mean like achieving anything, but just as a general symbolic gesture that begins that moment. I thought that was an interesting example.
Yeah, it is.
Like, I don't know if you heard, but just today, the Army Corps of Engineers gave up on the Dakota Access Pipeline.
I did, yeah, and I saw that the government somehow basically revoked a certain grant or something like that, so that they didn't get a permit or whatever, so that they wouldn't be able to continue drilling or drilling in a particular way. So the plans are going to have to change. Was that what you're talking about?
Yeah. What do you know? A fucking protest movement on the left worked, at least for now.
Right.
Achieved something. It can happen.
It can happen. It can happen. Yeah. So let me ask you this. Do you think that if Bonhoeffer were around today, obviously he would constantly, here's another quote right here. I just want to read real quick. He wanted to align himself with the Jews, and we had to fight with the Jewish victims because he said they were the weakest and most defenseless brothers of Jesus Christ. So would somebody like Bonhoeffer, he'd be seeking who the weakest and most defenseless are? Would that be, we talked about identity politics last week. Would that be anyone in any situation who is oppressed or marginalized or is on the periphery of the systems of privilege or the dynamics of privilege. So wherever that person is, whether it's economic injustice or economic inequality or economic weakness, or whether that was identitarian weakness. And no matter what, Bonhoeffer would align himself in those situations.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, because I was thinking, as much as theology is like the bastard discipline of the academy, and you're not allowed to, actually engage in theology and be serious as an academic, there's a sense in which theology can be both the best and worst of this problem, right? And theology can make you focus on identity and ignore political economy entirely, as the Nazis did with their sort of use of Christian theology, Nazi theology. It can also be the best in that theology can be a way to combine the economic and the identitarian together as symbiotic, like we were talking about last week. You can see both of those like through a parallax, and you don't have to separate them whatsoever. Theology has like it's got some fruit there that you can use. You can talk about identities. You can talk about even the more abstract concepts like sinners and brotherhood and things like that. But in an inclusionary way, you can view the gospel as being a universal message to all, and then view that as being, one where there's economic equality, right, and sharing of resources and things like that. A higher concept to appeal to. I was thinking, Bonhoeffer in many ways was making a similar point that Martin Luther King was, and saying, hey, white Christians who are saying we shouldn't be protesting, we shouldn't be causing disruptions, we shouldn't make life uncomfortable for people who are just trying to get to work and shit like that. You're the problem. Like, evil happens when good men do nothing, he said, right? And so theology was in a way a call to them to say, if you're really serious about your faith, then you would be behind us, because you'd realize that equality is more important. Even economic equality is more important than your comfortable daily lives. And theology has a way of of being a way you can appeal to that higher law that's more important than just having, a job to go to.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird inversion of the Feuerbachian claim. I think it was Feuerbach, right, that said that theology is just anthropology writ large. And it's the idea that he's using that as a criticism, which I'm totally cool with, in the idea of the collapse of metaphysics and things like that, or a sort of a transvaluing of metaphysics, if you will, maybe. I'm cool with that, but I think there's also something interesting to say that if you have a sort of immanent type of theology, or a radical social or liberatory theology, like you get in Bonhoeffer, like you get in later Latin American liberation theologies and Black liberation theology and things like that, then there is a sense in which doing theology is just doing anthropology. That doing theology is just being here and present and building communities in the material world. And so I'm totally with Bonhoeffer on this. It was so interesting when you suggested to do this. I was like, oh, fuck, I hadn't read Bonhoeffer in it's been 8 years. So for me,
since college.
Since college. So it was really nice to go back and look through some of the old things and to flip through I had some old books on my computer that I had all marked up, and some wanky ass shit that I wrote in the margins. I was like, God damn, I was such a dumbass little pretentious, 20 something punk, man. Thought I knew some shit. I thought I was going to change the church, man. Oh fuck! I still think I'm going to change the church. What am I talking about? Fuck it.
It's still time, yo.
Yeah, I know, that's right. That's right. It is the Bonhoeffer moment. Let's change that shit. But well, cool. So, what do you think? Summing up, is there anything else you want to say about this article, about the Bonhoeffer moment? Anything else?
I think you said it, man. It's just this focus on community, and if we're going to see ourselves as having a Bonhoeffer moment, it's going to be one where we're in solidarity with the weak and powerless. At least those who are weak and powerless according to the states, who are targeted by the state, whatever powers exist, and calling those who would find the gospel as their locus of salvation to do the same. Even if we're outside that community, we can still use those resources to call them out. Exactly.
Yeah, I read, just real quick, I just said, is there anything you want to sum up? And then, of course, here I come in, Mr. Chatty, fucking dumbass Kathy. I'm not trying to get the final word in, but I read something really interesting today, and it was by one of my heroes, Ron Aronson, And he wrote an article in the Boston Review that was called A New Politics of Hope. And in it, he quotes Ernst Bloch, who talks about how Marxism has a warm stream and a cold stream. And one of the things that he says is that you have to have both. You have to have that warm stream, which is the emotional, empathic desire to actually build communities, as well as the cold stream of economic analysis and rigorous sort of like material programming and things like that, and strategizing. And one of the things that I think that leftists are so bad with is they're bad at the warm stream. They're so bad with that. And theology is so good with that, but it's bad with the cold stream. It's bad with analysis, and it's bad with like large-scale planning in any sort of material sense, because it oftentimes doesn't care about the material world in the first instance, or even in the last instance. It cares about this world as a means to an end. And so I think reading these theologians and reading like the Christian mystics, which I still go back to every once in a while, like Meister Eckhart, is there something about stimulating that warm stream that I find to be very useful in creating empathy for community building.
All that talk about warm streams, I think I have to go micturate now. I also want to add that I don't know that I'm any good at like analysis, but you're kind of the warm stream of the podcast.
I'm the warm stream? Oh, wait, so I'm the lactate of the podcast?
Yeah, I shouldn't have used that illustration first.
I'll take it.
As the last word I want to point out, in reference to calling out those in the Christian church who have failed this Bonhoeffer moment, the president of our own undergrad university and church that we both went to, John MacArthur, has come out in support of the more than mildly, basically just in support of the Trump administration and the GOP right now. Yeah. And he publicly did when he didn't really have to. So, and really hasn't before, as far as I can remember, ever aligned himself or our college with a political movement or administration in any sense. And I want to go ahead and just say that, y'all just sinned against the Holy Spirit and against the gospel. So congratulations for that. You're being called out.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for that suggestion this week, Troy. It was nice to kind of delve back into some theology and shit. So now, let's turn on to the next segment. Sticky Leaves. I have no idea what Troy is going to talk about, but he's going to talk about something that is giving him meaning in a world that is oftentimes devoid of meaning. T-Roy, what's up?
So my Sticky Leaves really is, in a sense, kind of a thank you to you of 4 years ago, who recommended that I watch a brand new, little-known show on Sundance called Rectify.
Oh, yes.
You dropped that knowledge on me, and I watched it, and I can honestly say it's been the best series I've seen on TV in that time, and one of my favorite TV series I've ever seen. And honestly, probably, I feel like the most emotionally effective and challenging series I've ever seen. Usually TV, we want it to be entertaining and to speak to the world, and usually end up just, kind of clarifying our own views. But Rectify is honestly a challenging show to me. Now, just to summarize real quick, the plot, which is, it's not very complicated, it's not plotty at all, really, the show, is about a guy named Daniel, and he has been in jail for 17 or 18 years, almost 20 years, for murdering his girlfriend when he was 17 or 18, something like that. Mm-hmm. And he, after these 15 years, he gets off because of DNA retesting that happens, and they find that there's someone else's sperm basically was collected at the scene. So he's let off just for that, I guess, plausible deniability or whatever. That said, most people in his little town in, I think it's Georgia, right? Somewhere in the South, think he still did it. So there's this weird tension in the town, and he never actually comes out and says he didn't do it, because he's very quiet and introspective. So people always wonder, why wouldn't he be vociferously defending himself if he were actually innocent? And the series follows his the time after his release and his own sort of existential musings with life, his relationships with his family, many of whom have fought for years and years for his release and don't see the results in his personal life they expect, like the joy and exuberance you would think of somebody finally getting out of jail after 20 years. The fourth season of the show just started, and it's going to be the last season of the series. And I've only watched the first couple episodes so far. I'm one or two behind. But it's been as beautiful and moving and challenging as it's ever been. And I'm very excited to watch the last few. Have you seen any of the new ones?
Dude, I haven't seen it past the second season.
Oh my god, you need to get on that.
I haven't seen season 3, dude.
That's your Christmas homework.
Okay,
Holiday
I'll take
homework
it.
right there.
Deal.
I want to play really quick a short little minute or two long monologue that Daniel gives in the season premiere of this season, where he's talking a little. He's in a halfway house. He's moved to a different state. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but he gives a little monologue here on the loneliness he felt in prison, being in isolation on death row for the entire time. After one of his friends on death row, who he had communicated with, is executed, and how that loneliness continues today, even though he's now out. So I'm going to play that real quick right now.
Wasn't sure you'd still be here, Dan. Have a seat.
Hell is other people.
I don't follow.
It's a quote from a play that I read in prison called No Exit.
Damn, you weren't into escapist fare, were you?
The 3 characters in the play were forced to be together. Just be together. In a room for eternity. And that was their hell.
Well, like I said last night, Dan, you don't have to be here. Certainly not for eternity.
That's the problem. I'm not sure I can be out there either. In the world.
Now, that sounds like hell.
Those other guys in the house, Nate, Pickle, Tires, when they were in prison, they were usually around a lot of other guys, right? Interacting.
Sounds like prison.
I was alone, interacting with myself.
I'm aware of that.
Or the voices inside the grate.
Voices?
The other inmates on the row. We would communicate with each other through the grates.
I see.
Sometimes with friends, sometimes with not friends at all. But no matter who it was, I would never get to see them or feel them, their presence. And that's not the same.
No. No, it's not.
And I did that. I lived like that for 20 years.
That's a long time.
It's a strange way to exist.
It's inhuman. What is it, Dan? If not now, when?
After my friend was executed, I became despondent. More despondent. I guess depressed, enraged. But more than anything, I was lonely. So deeply lonely. He had protected me from that more than I realized.
I bet.
When you were alone with yourself all the time, with no one but yourself, you begin to go deeper and deeper into yourself until you lose yourself. It's a perverse contradiction. It's like your ego begins to disintegrate until you have no ego. Not in the sense that you become humble or gain some kind of perspective, but that you literally lose your sense of self. And I'm not sure anyone, unless they have gone through it, can truly understand how profound that loss is. It's like the psychic glue that binds your whole notion of existence is gone. You become unglued. I think, therefore I am. I think too much, therefore I am not. I am not, therefore I am nothing. I am nothing, therefore I am dead. And if I am dead, then why am I still so goddamn lonely?
Okay, so that, in addition to being stirring, the use of music. I think the actor's name is Aidan Young. He's a guy I've never seen before.
Hey, he's
before the
Australian
series
or some
started.
shit like that.
He's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about like the Emmys, but if he's not nominated and wins for at least as a posthumous thing for like the whole series, then that's ridiculous because he's so amazing in this role, understated but with hints of emotional intensity that just bring chills up your spine.
Remember the
every
fucking
so often.
the coffee scene? Is at the end of the first season?
Oh my god! Don't say anything because you need to watch the series. But
Yeah, but he's talking about how he's understated, and when he says there are those blurps of emotional intensity, and when they
are
come,
intense.
They are intense.
And there's I can't remember if you've seeing on the end of the second season, but there's points where he goes back to with law enforcement and with the judge talking about the crime that have been up there with anything Breaking Bad ever did.
Wow.
As far as intensity.
Yeah.
And from a show that usually is not very plotty, when it does plot, it smacks you in the face with it. Anyway, that little monologue right there, I thought was just in addition to a chills up your spine moment, was such an amazing comment on sort of existential, basically loneliness and difficulty finding a place in society for anybody. He talks about it from the stance of someone who'd been isolated in prison, and that isolation is kept with him in many ways. But I think it's pretty clear that there are other characters in this series. It's not just about him, and they all, in a sense, experience this same sort of loneliness and isolation, but in very different ways depending upon their own personalities, their own experiences. Everybody, you feel for everybody in this show, even the people who are supposed to be the villains, because they all can't quite find their place and their significance and meaning. And that's all really abstract and existentialist and whatever. But you watch this show and you don't have to know any of that stuff to feel it all. And the show is so amazing at taking these abstract concepts we can talk about in philosophy or in psychology or whatever, and making you feel them to their utmost. And that's just, I can't think of any piece of art that I know of that can do that with that level of regularity and that level of depth.
Wow.
It's just a beautiful series.
It is. It's absolutely beautiful. The opening segment, too, that song, I was so obsessed with that song that I had to track down who it was. And I can't remember who it was now, but I had to track it down and get it because it's so fucking beautiful. So just Google Rectify opening credits on YouTube and you'll hear what I'm talking about. It is gorgeous.
Yeah, in addition to that, it's not a downer all the time. It's funny.
No.
And the dialogue is great, and the acting is fantastic, and the music is wonderful, and the cinematography
beautiful
is great, despite the fact that it's obviously low budget. It's just every level. It's just an excellent piece of art, and I would encourage anybody who's gotten an hour into this podcast that if you have time this holiday break or whatever it is, you will not find a better way to spend it than with 4 seasons of Rectify.
Fucking A. Sounds good. Now I've got my homework for the rest of the holiday break here.
I'm excited about you getting to watch it since you're the one who turned me onto it in the first place.
I know, that's kind of awesome. It's so funny. I kind of forgot about the show. I don't know why. I just kind of fucking forgot about it.
It's not out there at all. Like, you don't see people talking about, oh my god, did you watch Rectify on Twitter?
No, that's so fucking true. I think I remember one time I was checking the Nielsen ratings, and it gets literally like fewer than 1 million views a week, you know? Which on any other network would be the death knell. You know, you fucking, I think, what is it? Big Bang Theory gets something ridiculous, like almost 20 million a week. And these guys are hovering somewhere around like 600,000, 700,000 viewers, you know? And that's them kind of, you know, doing a successful run of this show. But that's what I love about those independent TV networks and the various media platform now that are opened up to visual artists. Because you can have a show like Rectify. Can you imagine having a show like Rectify on when there was just basic cable, or prior to the age of the internet, or prior to the age of expanded satellite TV and shit like that? No way.
Oh, yeah, never would have made it.
Never.
Good on Sundance for realizing not only it was in their economic interests to have this in their catalog for the future, but just that even if that didn't end up being the case, like, this was something you had to get behind. It was special.
Yeah.
And for your brand's sake, this was good to do. I mean,
yeah, Robert
fuck brands,
Redford. Congratulations, Robert Redford. You're a good dude. You done good for
You
yourself.
think he knows anything about this?
No, he knows nothing about this, but still, I'm going to give him credit.
I think he's banging 20-year-old blonde right now. I don't think he cares.
He doesn't give a fuck.
All right, so for our next segment, bullshitting, we're going to talk about something that we either doesn't matter or that we know very little about. And I think it veers more on the former this time, in that it doesn't really matter.
No.
But Austin, you're going to have to intro this because I literally don't know anything about what you're talking about.
Well, so it was inspired by recent events where Luke Bryan, he's a country singer, very famous country singer, which I'm surprised that Troy doesn't understand because I know you like to ride on a tractor and, you have a dog and you wear your cowboy hat all the time. That's how you go to class, right? Chaps and a cowboy hat. Just assless chaps, though. No jeans underneath. That's what I was told.
All about the assless chaps.
All about the assless chaps. And they're leather, too, right? With nice little tassels on them. And you can't forget your spurs either. But so Luke Bryan, I totally just stereotyped people who listen to Westerns because that's just what I think. Because I'm from Southern California where we just don't listen to Western unless you're a cute girl driving a Jetta. But I digress. Luke Bryan is a country music singer who apparently jumped into the crowd and punched a fan because the fan was flipping him off. And I just kind of thought, first of all, you don't hear about like that kind of aggression at country shows usually, or I don't anyway, except for maybe in the audience because people are drinking beers and it's just like testosterone. Because it made me think of punk shows. And I remember the first time I was at a punk show, I was at an anti-flag show. And there was and this was actually the complete opposite. There was a fight that had broken out, and I think it was Warped Tour when I was like fucking 16 or something like that in LA somewhere. And the lead singer from Anti-Flag stopped playing, jumped into the crowd, and broke up a fight, and was like, "No one's gonna be fucking fighting at my show. You're not fighting at my show." And I remember my friends and I, who were kind of like douchebag 16-year-old skate punk kids, were like, "That guy's a pussy, man. Let him fight." Now I love Anti-Flag, actually, in my in my little bit older age. I actually really appreciate a lot of what Anti-Flag is written about. But I remember at the time, I thought that was so lame because I was like, let him fucking fight. Because, I was young, dumb, and full of cum, as they say. And I thought that aggression was a cool thing. But I don't know, Troy, what are your thoughts on fights at punk shows or fights at metal shows or Luke Bryan punching an audience member in the face?
Well, I don't know about the latter, but I love fights at punk shows. I mean, I've been to a lot of punk shows, hardcore, metal, whatever. I've seen a few scuffles. I don't think I'd call anything an outright fight. That said, I did want to reference, and I'm glad you brought up the Anti-Flag story anecdote, because I have my own, not personal anecdote, but one I know you can find on the internet. Ian MacKaye, who's one of my personal heroes, both musically, politically, personally, and otherwise. He was the frontman of Minor Threat in the early 80s and of Fugazi, one of my all-time favorite bands in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And Ian MacKaye, I can't remember if it was a Fugazi show or a Minor Threat show, but you can find this video on YouTube. Perhaps we'll even link to it in the show notes, where there was there's a pit, and there always is at a hardcore punk show, right? And I guess some big dude like ran over a smaller kid and then refused to help them up, and then kept running over people. Being a dick in the pit. Like people don't understand. Yeah. In the pit at a metal or a punk show, it's not violence in the sense of trying to hurt people.
No, there's a reciprocity.
You run into people, but it's a community type of event. It's playful. So if you knock somebody over, literally everybody stops and helps that person up.
Yes.
And people are very kind. In fact, more kind than I would think at probably most pop shows, where people are constantly like cursing at each other or whatever.
Right.
Or hating on each other, backstabbing and whatnot. So at this show, this person was not following those rules and was running over people and trying to hurt them. So Ian MacKaye, in the middle of a song, stops the entire concert, tells his band, stop. And he says, you. And he said something the guy was wearing, which was really funny, which I can't remember. And he says, you think you're so badass running into people and hurting them? I'm not going to have that at my show. In fact, I saw you before the show started. You were eating ice cream outside. You think you're such a tough dude? I saw you eating motherfucking ice cream, you ice cream eating motherfucker. And that line has stuck with me forever.
You ice cream eating motherfucker.
I say that to people when they're acting too tough. Oh, you're just some ice cream eating motherfucker. Because he said that, and he kept saying it over and over again, talking about how he saw him eating ice cream outside, and that he thinks he's so tough, and that he needs to leave. And he said, I'll pay for your ice cream.
Is ice cream eating motherfucker your leftist version of cuck? Oh no, I said it on the podcast.
Yeah, people who put on a front, we should just call them ice cream eating motherfuckers.
Deal. That's the title of this episode, is it not? Trump, the ice cream eating motherfucker. No,
yeah, we can't put his name in the title of the show anymore.
No, we can't.
But something about that we'll use.
I like that. Yeah, no, I dig that, man. I remember my first experience personally of feeling that enjoyment when I was in a pit, because I was in a punk band for a while, and it was different when you see this shit take place. I actually had a couple of buddies who they didn't quite get that the pit was supposed to be this reciprocal expression of vitality or aggression or whatever, but in a positive way. And they used to like actually start fights at these bars that we would be at, and they get kicked out. And Tristan, Stan, if you're listening to this, I love you, but you guys just didn't get the rules, and they got kicked out all the time because they were kind of like meathead jock guys, but they like to listen to aggressive music, so they would fight. But the first time I experienced it was, I don't remember who I was seeing, but I was at this small little show in Southern Orange County at this venue called Chain Reaction in Anaheim. Have you ever been to Chain Reaction?
Yeah, I've been there.
So it's like tiny, right? Like it's as big as my fucking living room. And the stage is only like 2 feet high, and the band is like in it. But the pit was going, and my shoe fell off. And I had no clue where the fucking shoe was, but it's dark, and the flow of the pit was circular. So I was still getting pushed around, and I was like, oh, fuck, I lost my shoe. And about like 20 seconds later, I get tapped on the shoulder, and there's this fucking, spiky-haired fucking dude that's like, hey, man, I got your shoe. And he like reached over the crowd and gave me my shoe back. Like, he like found my shoe. He must have seen that I was looking for my shoe. I didn't know who this fucking dude was. And he gave me my shoe back. And then as soon as that happened, we came back, and we got back in the pit and started pushing each other around. So it was kind of an interesting, almost counterintuitive experience. And I think at the time I was pretty young at the time, but that was the first time I was kind of like, oh, this is like a cool community thing.
Oh, that's great, because now you've reminded me of a story that I have to tell.
All right, go ahead.
It's going to be the antithesis to what you just told. I was at the Vegas Festival in Las Vegas during college. I don't remember which year. And there was on the main stage at this festival, there was Queens of the Stone Age, Muse, and then Rage Against the Machine. And obviously Queens and Muse are not, metal or punk or anything. So there wasn't really a pit. It was just a big show. Right. But Rage attracts a bit of a different crowd. And they were playing late at night. So I had to watch Queens and Muse, who are two bands that I really love, and had stayed and waiting for Rage to come on. Rage took like an hour and a half between sets to come on. It was ridiculous. And people were packed because it was the only stage that was left with like, it seems like millions of people were there, it felt like.
Right.
The second, I was probably 3 or 4 people from the stage, and it must have gone, the crowd must have gone hundreds back as far as dimensions. And when Rage finally came on, there was a massive push forward with no barriers between anybody. Yeah. And so although I'm tall, I just got trampled, and so did everybody else around me. I got picked up against my will, and it was Vegas, so I had made the unfortunate choice of wearing sandals and basketball shorts because it was really hot, and it was a chill festival. Like there were no pits really much of anywhere, and so I wasn't worried about having to wear like armor or anything. And I lost my sandals and I lost my shorts in the crowd. They came off.
Dude, were you crowd surfing? Is that why? Were you up on top? Were you crowd surfing? Is that why?
I got picked up a little bit, and that's when I lost everything. Then I went down to the ground, and I ended up on the ground getting trampled without my pants. And so I had to crawl through the crowd for it felt like an hour, but it must have probably been 30 seconds to a minute.
That's amazing.
Trying to find my shorts, and I found them and I put them back on, and then I got up and was able to squeeze my way off to the side. Never found my sandals. Never got them back. Had to walk home with no shoes. And that was one of the scariest moments of my life, because I thought I was gonna like die naked and alone seeing Rage Against the Machine.
Were you balls swinging?
Which actually would have been kind of the great way to go out now that I think about it, but it was not great at the time.
Were you like fucking just airing it out, or did you have boxers on?
Oh no, I had boxers. I was not naked, but I was one step away from being naked.
Okay. Oh, dude.
That would have been terrible.
That's fucking funny, man. Oh, God. I haven't been to a live like punk show in a while. I'd need to get back to something like that. That'd be fun, man. In Ireland, they just have every pub out here has a lot of like folk music and shit like that, which I totally dig. Especially when they do like Irish rebel songs and shit, and the crowd really gets into it.
Celtic folk shit's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. But man, I would love to go to a good old fashioned punk show. So if y'all are music fans out there and you know what's going to be playing here in Dublin, hit me up. Let me know. I'm down.
When are the Dropkick Murphys going to be out there?
Bro, if they were here for Paddy's Day or like Flogging Molly, could you imagine?
Oh yeah.
Shit,
That'd be
I
awesome.
think that Flogging Molly and Dropkick Murphys, they play in like Chicago and Boston respectively. I don't remember which one plays which, but every year on Paddy's Day, one of them is playing in Boston and one of them is playing, I think, or one of them is in New York. I think, I'm not 100% sure.
I'm pretty sure Dropkick's always going to be in Boston.
Yeah, I think so. So, but what if if Flogging Molly's playing in Dublin on Paddy's Day, my night is sorted.
All right, so that's it for bullshitting. I guess now we got to throw it off to Mike and see what he's got to say this week.
That's right. Michael.
With first-class legroom, free cocktails for everyone, and a schedule you can depend on.
What's up, Alzadon? This is Michael Burns with This Week in Hip Hop. I hope that you are having a good one. I want to talk about 2 records and 2 things I think you should watch this week. First things first, the Smoke DZA and Pete Rock record titled Don't Smoke Rock, which is an efficient album title and pretty solid life advice. But it came out this week, so if you are into classic Pete Rock production, if you're into Smoke DZA, you are going to like this record. Smoke DZA is often known for being a weed rapper, which he is, but I think on this project especially, he navigates this weed rap persona while still staying firmly within the tradition of really fierce Harlem lyricist. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, that laid back kind of fun weed vibe, while also being reminded that you are listening to one of the better rappers from New York right now. It has solid features. We get Cameron, Wale, Rick Ross, a few others, but no one really outshines DZA, which is good because you feel like all of the features are complementing what's going on. And as well, it seems like all of the featured artists fall in with the Pete Rock production. They sound like they're tailoring their verses and their styles to Pete Rock, which is what you should fucking do if you get to rhyme over a Pete Rock beat. The standout tracks for me, one's called Dusk to Dusk, and that one features Big Crit and Dom Kennedy. I'm not normally the biggest Dom Kennedy fan, but for some reason it worked. Black Superhero Car is another track featuring Rick Ross. I have a soft spot for Rick Ross. Hearing Rick Ross on Pete Rock production is pretty dope. And then maybe my favorite track from the record is called Hold the Drums. This one is called Hold the Drums because Pete Rock literally holds the drums. It has this piano sample beat, and you sort of hear some jazzy drums coming in, and right before the drums hit, the sample loops. So you get this kind of airy, jazzy beat in the background with DZA rapping over it. It's really strong, but I definitely recommend this record, especially if you're a fan of classic hip-hop. The other record that came out this week that I guess is not strictly a hip-hop record, but fuck it, we'll talk about it, is the Childish Gambino record, Awaken My Love. I don't think anyone saw this coming. I don't know about you all, but I was one of the people that has consistently clowned on Donald Glover's musical pursuits. The early stuff was really corny, and him just kind of wearing the costume of Drake or Kanye or Lil Wayne on different tracks. Because the Internet I thought was really good, but my favorite parts of Because the Internet weren't really the rapping. It was the singing, it was the production. He did have that kind of famous Sway freestyle where we all realized that Donald Glover can rap without falling into corny tropes and punchlines. But I don't think anyone saw like a futuristic cosmic funk record coming out with no rapping and just singing, and very spacey produced singing as well, man. But this is a really strong project. Obviously, everyone's talking about the P-Funk influence, and obviously it's there, but I'm in the camp of not thinking this record is derivative or just a copy of that style, because I think there's something contemporary about it, something that, while being grounded in that 70s and 80s style, I think it kind of shares a spiritual camaraderie with the last D'Angelo record, with Kendrick's To Pimp a Butterfly. I think it's participating in this return to a certain funk and soul sound within hip-hop and R&B. Standout tracks for me, Have Some Love, Riot, Baby Boy. Man, I vibed out to this record so hard this week. Those are my 3 favorite. The weird thing, though, is there's definitely a why the fuck track, meaning why the fuck was this on here, which was California. And I'm not on an island here. Most reviews mention this, but it's weird. The production doesn't fit with the rest of the record. It has this auto-tune and fake patois. I don't know what was going on there, and honestly, if that song wasn't on the record, I'd be happy. But if you like it, that's cool, because I respect your journey and want you to be happy. But yeah, Awaken My Love by Childish Gambino. You should listen to it. And if you don't like this one, I don't know. Ask yourself some questions. Think about why you're into music. Okay, now 2 quick things. I want you to watch some stuff if you have some time. Often people have time over the holidays to watch things. But in particular, 2 things dropped recently on Netflix that I think are really crucial and informative when thinking about the history of hip-hop. So the first thing is a 4-part series on Netflix. It's called Hip Hop Evolution. It's hosted by a Canadian MC named Shad. And it looks at the early days of hip-hop. The first 3 episodes are just New York up through the emergence of West Coast rap. It's really great. I mean, you look at where production styles came from, how we got from sort of hip-hop as an art form that only took place live and on tape to something that was then on wax. We get to see something that's important, which is, and a lot of us know this, but how the first commercially produced rap record, Rapper's Delight, it's basically made by a bunch of corny posers, and it was a group put together by someone's mom, which is always kind of lame. But it's just a really, really good series. I was kind of worried that it'd be corny, but it's not. It's pretty on point. And if you watch The Get Down, this series kind of does an interesting job of showing you some of the actual background and what was going on during that same period in New York. So I recommend watching that. The other thing that came out on Netflix, this movie's been out for a while, but I know a lot of us are lazy and don't watch things unless we can stream them. The Stretch and Bobbito documentary, Radio That Changed Lives, is now on Netflix. If you don't know who Stretch and Bobbito are, that's fine, but it tells me that you did not start caring about hip-hop till quite recently in your life. These are the dudes that started the most famous and influential hip-hop radio show, I would say ever, definitely the most important one in New York. They started when they were real young, doing a public radio show out of Columbia, the college there. Eventually went to Hot 97 before it fell apart. But you were talking about a radio show where before these artists were signed, they were on their premiering tracks and freestyling. So we're talking Nas, Jay-Z, Big L, Big Pun, the Wu-Tang Clan, Mos Def. Like anyone that you care about from 90s New York rap was on there, was freestyling. I know that when the internet first became a thing, I used to try to download episodes of Stretch and Bob on like Real Player or something, and it would take hours. But some of the freestyles are insane. You've probably heard some of them. And the documentary is really cool because not only does it focus on, their show and how they came up with this idea, but it really takes you into what it was like before hip hop blew up. And really the whole show and the documentary get at that moment in the pre-Jiggy era. What was going on in New York hip-hop from about 91 to 98, a period many will refer to as the golden era. But it's awesome, and there's some unreleased freestyles we get to hear. For example, they've uncover a tape of a 16-year-old Biggie freestyling on their show, which is just crazy to listen to. And you also get to watch a lot of these older artists go back and listen to themselves from 20, 25 years ago, and it's really cool to see that. So Stretch and Bobbito, Radio That Changed Lives. Watch it maybe after you watch Hip Hop Evolution, the 4-part series, and you will be caught up a little bit. So that's it for me this week. Look out for a special episode coming soon where I'm going to do a year-end list and talk about some of my favorite stuff from this week. Enjoy the whole podcast. I am at Mick O'Brien on Twitter if you would like to chat or dialogue, and hopefully you are having a nice week. Bye.
Cruising the sky as smoothly as a bird, you scarcely realize you are traveling...
All right, sweet. Thank you, Michael, for the recommendations this week. I gotta say, I'm actually really stoked with the recommendations this week because I don't know who the fuck, what's his name? Smokey guy?
Yeah, I had no idea who that was.
I'd never even heard of him before. So I know who Pete Rock is just because the name, right? But I had no idea who the artist is. But I checked out a couple tracks from it, and it's actually really pretty sick. So I'm stoked on that. And I have always been a white yuppie supporter of Childish Gambino. So the fact that he's getting some street cred from a guy that I know has his finger on the pulse of the hip hop community kind of makes me feel validated a little bit.
No, you're not validated. He sucked back then. He's good now. That's the end of the story.
All right, that makes sense. I will say, so I've accumulated like a few dudes that I really look up to. Obviously, James Franco is one of them, but they're these polymaths.
James Franco's not a polymath, but whatever.
He is, though, dude. He Yale PhD. He's a writer. He's an actor. He's a producer. He's a director. You have to be
good at all those things to be a polymath. Not just have opportunity to do all those things. That's just proof America's not a meritocracy. That's all.
Okay, whatever, fine. Donald Glover, then, is a polymath that I look up to because the guy was a writer on 30 Rock. He's a stand-up comedian. He's obviously an actor. He's obviously a producer and showrunner and creator. He's a hip-hop artist. He can sing. So, the guy's kind of always, not always, but for a long time now, he's been one of my heroes. So yeah, I'm stoked with this new album.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. I feel like whenever we talk about these polymaths in entertainment and media, usually they're of the James Franco type, where they're just kind of have the opportunity to do all those things. They're not necessarily good at those things. Or maybe being a musician opens up opportunity for you to act because of the money that would be made from you acting in a movie or a TV show. But they're not really good at it. They just kind of have charisma, and so they work. But he's actually good now at all these things that are disparate. They don't necessarily have to do with one another. Whereas most polymaths aren't that way, I feel like. I mean, who's another person that would fit that description who's actually legitimately really, really talented and sort of, not avant-garde, but, pushing forward a little bit in multiple arenas like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Most of the people that I think of are people like Greg Gaffin from Bad Religion, right? He is a PhD in evolutionary biology. Or evolutionary, what is it? It's not evolutionary biology, but it's evolutionary theory or something like that. And he's I think it's
evolutionary biology, but yeah, I'm not.
Is it evolutionary? Yeah, and he's also the front man of one of the most successful punk bands of the last 20 or so years, So those are kind of two disparate fields.
20 or so years.
30, yeah, well, dude. That's true. Fuck, since the 80s? God, man, that's dating me, I guess, so I didn't want to go that far. But yeah, man, and then isn't someone from Black Flag, the guitarist from Black Flag, doesn't he have a PhD?
Greg Ginn?
Or something like that. Yeah, Greg Ginn, doesn't he have a PhD or something?
If he does, I didn't know that. I'll have to look
Well,
that
I know
up.
I know Dexter from Offspring has a PhD in like fucking chemistry or some shit like that. So again, it's like these weird all the punk guys. Why are they getting PhDs in science? But those are really the only other figures that I can think of. I'm sure there are many other out there that people could point me to, but generally it seems that it's people that are like, they're artists, musicians, and they have a clothing line, right? That seems to be the typical thing, right? But with Glover, he seems to be doing kind of everything, because I think, although they are sort of all in the entertainment, artistic world, there does seem to be a little bit more of a variety of things that he's getting into.
Yeah, I'm down with it. I really like the new record quite a bit, so... that's on me for dissing on Gambino all these years.
See, I told you, man. You should have listened to me the whole time. I know what I'm talking about, man.
Well, you were still wrong then. Just because you made a prediction does not mean that correlation equals causation.
I don't know, man. According to some people who've never taken a logic class, it does. All right. Well, cool. Well, let's wrap it up, man. Another good episode. Thank you very much, Troy, for stimulating my mind. Thank you to the listeners for tuning in. Please feel free to check us out on our social media places. Troy, where can they find us?
You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at owls_at_Dawn. Drop us a 5-star review, hopefully, on iTunes. Really appreciate that. And otherwise, got anything else to say?
I think this is all you, brother.
All right. Das Vidania, Amerikanski.